Returning 3 days early from a business trip, I was resting on my bed after putting away my suitcase when I heard my husband and a stranger opening the front gate. I quickly rolled under the bed to hide and heard my husband say something to his mistress. I grabbed my suitcase and fled into the night. I dragged the heavy suitcase up each step, my body so weary it felt like it would collapse. The business trip down south, planned for a week, had ended 3 days early. I had worked day and night, pushing the schedule to the point of exhaustion just to get home and surprise my husband. The 3-story house was silent in the late afternoon. The sweltering summer sun still clung to the leaves of the trees by the gate. I quietly opened the door with my own key, not wanting to disturb my mother-in-law in her room. My mother-in-law, Dolores, was a woman so meticulous she was severe. She had an unshakable rule: a clean house is a cool house, a clean kitchen makes for a delicious meal. But her version of clean was a sterile, cold emptiness. She made me store all my personal belongings, from handbags and jackets to the smallest items, inside closed cabinets, absolutely forbidding them from being left in the living room or on the dining table. I trudged into our bedroom and dropped onto the soft bed without even changing. The familiar scent of the room made my eyelids droop. I planned to nap for a bit, then get up, clean, and cook a delicious dinner for the whole family. But I had only dozed for about 10 minutes when the sharp clatter of the iron gate being opened downstairs jolted me from my light sleep. Dolores's loud voice echoed up. My, this girl really knows how to pick them. Where did you get such a beautiful dress? It suits your figure much better than that country bumpkin." Then came the light, flirtatious laughter of an unfamiliar woman. "Oh, you're too kind, Mom. It's hard to find anything that fits with this baby bump. It's a good thing Mark is so thoughtful and buys me everything I need." My heart sank. Sleepiness vanished, replaced by a vague sense of dread rising in my chest. I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, not one person, but 3. The natural reflex of a daughter-in-law who always feared her mother-in-law's scrutiny sent me into a panic. My suitcase was still in the middle of the room, and I hadn't changed my clothes. If Dolores saw this mess, it would surely lead to another endless lecture. In my haste, without thinking clearly, I quickly rolled under the bed. Our bed was an old-fashioned, solid wood frame. The space underneath was high, but Dolores had covered it with a long bed skirt that touched the floor, creating a dark, enclosed space. The bedroom door swung open, and light from the hallway cast a long streak across the wood floor. I held my breath, curled up in the darkness. Dust tickled my nose, making me want to sneeze, but I suppressed it until my face turned red. 3 pairs of feet came into my limited view through the gap in the bedskirt. The familiar brown slippers of Dolores, the polished leather shoes of my husband, Mark, and a pair of striking, provocative red high heels. I heard Mark laugh, his deep, warm voice, the same voice that whispered words of love to me every day now, sounded mocking. "See? I told you. When Clara's gone, this house is finally ours. Just make yourself comfortable. I had my mom change the sheets. There's not a trace of her left." The other woman giggled and sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, right above my head. The spring mattress groaned. Her voice was a mix of petulance and triumph. "You say that, but what if she comes back unexpectedly? I don't want to be known as a homewrecker. After all, I'm carrying the heir to your family's name." Dolores quickly interjected, her voice sickly sweet, a stark contrast to the sharp tone she usually used with me. "Oh, Jessica, you worry too much. She's on a business trip all the way in Florida. It'll be ages before she's back. And even if she did come home, I'd just send her down to the kitchen or tell her to sleep in the guest room. What good is a woman who, after 3 years of marriage, can't even produce a child? Keeping her around is just a waste of food." Lying under the bed, hot tears streamed down my face, soaking my sleeves. So, the neatness Dolores forced upon me, that bizarre rule about hiding everything, wasn't about civilized living. It was to erase my very presence in my own home, to clear the way for another woman. I bit my lip hard, trying to stifle the sobs threatening to escape my throat. It felt like 1,000 needles were piercing my heart. But the worst was yet to come. I saw Mark kneel on one leg, his hand resting on the woman Jessica's stomach. His voice turned so cold and cruel I couldn't believe my ears. "Just be patient a little longer. Once we get rid of Clara according to plan, that $2.5 million land compensation for the highway project will be ours. Then I'll officially bring you home as my wife." The floor beneath me felt cold, but my heart was 1,000 times colder. That $2.5 million was the buyout for the inheritance land my parents had left me. The zoning decision had just been made last week, and I had naively shared the news with my husband, planning to use the money to renovate the house, give my mother-in-law a retirement fund, and secure our future. Yet, in the eyes of the people I called husband and mother, I was just an obstacle, a walking ATM that needed to be eliminated to seize my assets. The space under the bed was cramped and suffocating, like a small coffin. The smell of dust mingled with the overpowering perfume of the woman sitting above me. I lay motionless, my limbs numb with fear and a pain that spread through every fiber of my being. Through the tiny gap in the bed skirt, I saw something small and shiny roll across the floor. It was my lipstick, my favorite shade of burgundy, the one Mark had given me on our last wedding anniversary. Now, it lay at the feet of his mistress, a bitter insult to the foolish love I had given him completely. Jessica still seemed uneasy. Her voice rose again, this time more calculating and sharp than her innocent facade suggested. "But Mark, your wife is smart. She's a businesswoman. What if she refuses to sign over the deed? Or what if she doesn't die? What if it's like what happened to her parents? If the police investigate, what will happen to me and the baby?" Her question was like a bucket of ice water thrown in my face, making my heart stop for a second. My parents? Their horrific accident 3 years ago, the greatest pain of my life, a wound that had never stopped aching. Mark chuckled, a rattling sound from his chest that was utterly terrifying, a world away from his usual scholarly demeanor. He stood up and paced the room, his shoes thudding on the hardwood floor right next to my ear. "You worry too much. Her parents drove that old clunker of a pickup. I just had to sneak out and snip the brake line a little. Driving on those mountain roads, one hard brake and they went straight off the cliff. The police investigation concluded it was brake failure and the driver losing control. The case was closed ages ago." He paused, his voice dropping with smug satisfaction. "Clara was a wreck, passing out from the shock. I was the only one there to comfort her, to take care of her. She trusted me completely. She sees me as her savior. She'll do whatever I say. She'd never suspect a thing." Dolores, sitting in the armchair near the window, leisurely sipped her water and added, "Why bring up old stories? As long as my grandson is born safely and the money is in our hands, that's all that matters. A sentimental woman like Clara is weak. You just have to play your part right. Feed her whatever you want. Getting rid of her will be easy. I've already consulted a psychic. This month is an unlucky one for her. Whatever we do will go smoothly." I bit down hard on the back of my hand, so hard I could taste the metallic tang of blood in my mouth, just to stop myself from letting out a soul-tearing scream. My whole body trembled, and shudders of horror ran down my spine. It wasn't a coincidence that I was an orphan. It wasn't a coincidence that Mark had appeared like a knight in shining armor during the darkest days of my life. It was all a meticulously staged play, performed on the graves of my parents. The man I called my husband, the man I shared my bed with, the man I entrusted my entire life to, was the cold-blooded murderer who had stolen my most beloved family from me. My tears flowed inward, hot and salty. I remembered my father's kind eyes, my mother's warm smile, and the years they had worked, saving every penny to buy that land as a wedding gift for me. And now, that very land was the reason their daughter had fallen into a den of wolves. A powerful hatred flared within me, overwhelming my fear. I knew I couldn't break down now. I could not die, and I certainly couldn't let these animals achieve their vile goal. Mark leaned down and kissed Jessica's forehead, his voice disgustingly sweet. There, don't worry yourself and harm the baby. Let's go down to the kitchen. Mom has a roasted chicken waiting for you. Eat up, get your strength back for tonight." Jessica giggled, a sound like shattering glass against my eardrums. The three of them noisily left the room. Their footsteps faded down the stairs, leaving me alone in the darkness under the bed, with a shattered heart and a soul hardening with vengeance. The footsteps of the three of them disappeared behind the bedroom door, leaving a silence so profound it was eerie. I remained under the bed for a few more minutes, listening to the sounds of laughter from the kitchen, the clinking of plates, and the fragrant smell of cooking food that began to waft up. They were probably celebrating. Celebrating their wicked plan. Celebrating my impending misfortune and my preordained death. I bit my lip until it bled, trying to suppress the tremors that racked my body. Slowly, I slid out from the dusty space under the bed. My legs were numb from being in an awkward position for so long. It took a moment of rubbing before I could stand steady. But my heart was completely cold. I looked around the bedroom that had once been my sanctuary, a place I had poured so much love into. Now it felt alien and terrifying. I tiptoed to the small safe in the corner of the closet where our most important documents were kept. Luckily, Mark was arrogant and complacent. He always thought I was a foolish woman who trusted him implicitly, so he never changed the combination. It was still our wedding date. With trembling hands, I turned the dial. The soft click of the lock opening sounded like the unlocking of destiny. I hastily grabbed the deed to the $2.5 million property, all the wedding jewelry my mother had given me, and most importantly, a file of Mark's high-interest loan documents that I had secretly collected months ago. I stuffed everything into the bottom of my still unpacked suitcase, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew I couldn't stay here a second longer, but I couldn't raise any suspicion either. I needed time and a clear head to plan my next move, to repay them for all the pain they had caused me and my parents. I pulled the suitcase quietly out the back door, which led to a small, seldom-used alley, avoiding any contact with the three of them feasting in the dining room. Once on the main street, I hailed a taxi and told the driver to take me to a hotel in a different district, as far away from this house as possible. Sitting in the car, watching the streetlights streak past the window, my tears began to flow again uncontrollably. I missed my mom and dad, our warm family dinners, and even the tender, deceitful look in Mark's eyes when we were first in love. It was all now just a black hole of betrayal and lies. I took out my phone, blocked Mark's number, and composed a text message to the house landline, which Dolores always answered. Taking a deep breath, I wrote each word as calmly as I could. "Mom, on my way home, but there's a major emergency at the office. My boss is making me fly out to handle a PR crisis at the Southern Branch tonight. I'll probably be gone for another week. Please take care of yourself." After sending the message, I turned off my phone and leaned my head against the cool glass. I felt as if a great weight had been lifted, only to be replaced by another, even heavier burden. At the hotel, I checked in and went straight to the bathroom, turning the shower on full blast to wash away the grime from under the bed and the filth that clung to my mind. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Her eyes were dark and sunken, her face gaunt, but her gaze was chillingly sharp. I recalled Mark's words about cutting my parents' brake lines and Dolores's greedy expression when she mentioned the $2.5 million. Suddenly, a memory of my mother-in-law's daily habits surfaced with stark clarity. Dolores was pathologically cheap. She had a habit of keeping leftovers in the fridge for a week, but never covered them properly. Raw and cooked foods were jumbled together. Worse, she would unplug the refrigerator at night to save electricity, then plug it back in the morning. I had tried to reason with her many times, explaining that bacteria would multiply and the food would spoil, but she always brushed me off, calling me a spoiled brat who made up problems. "I've eaten like this my whole life, and I'm not dead yet," she would snap. An idea sparked in my mind, cold and ruthless. If they wanted me dead to take my money, I would use their own greed and ignorance to send them on their way. I sank to the bathroom floor, the sound of the running water a roar in my ears, but in my head I was scripting a perfect play. No knives, no blood, just a lavish meal, an unplugged refrigerator, and the insatiable greed of the human heart. That night was the longest of my life. The hotel room was luxurious, with a warm bed and soft pillows, but I felt as cold as if I were lying in a graveyard. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of my parents' crumpled truck and Mark's vile smirk would appear like tormenting ghosts. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and put a new SIM card I had just bought into my phone to look up some information. An automated text from the power company arrived, a reminder to pay last month's bill. It made me freeze. The electricity usage for this month was at a record low, only half of the previous month's. I gave a bitter, twisted smile. Dolores must have ramped up her extreme saving measures while I was away, unplugging every appliance, including the refrigerator, at night. I remembered once, going downstairs for a drink in the middle of the night, I found a puddle of water spreading out from the fridge. When I opened it, the cold air was gone, replaced by a nauseating smell of raw meat mixed with old leftovers. I had argued with her about it, but she just glared. "What do you know? Refrigerators hold their cold just fine. Unplugging it for a few hours at night doesn't hurt anything. The electric bill is skyrocketing. Don't you care about your husband's money?" At the time, I had held my tongue to keep the peace. I never imagined that her stubborn ignorance would now become the sharpest weapon in my hands. I opened my web browser and typed in keywords about food poisoning from improper storage. A flood of results appeared, but an old news report caught my eye. Risk of fatal listeria infection from watermelon, left in refrigerator overnight. I devoured every word, my heart beating faster with each scroll. The article explained that Listeria monocytogenes is an extremely dangerous bacterium capable of multiplying even in the low temperatures of a refrigerator if it isn't cold enough. Watermelon in particular, after being cut, becomes an ideal breeding ground if stored uncovered with raw foods like meat and fish in a refrigerator that cycles on and off. When ingested, it doesn't cause immediate symptoms. After an incubation period, it attacks the nervous system, leading to sepsis, meningitis, and multi-organ failure. The fatality rate is very high without timely medical intervention. I put down the phone and covered my face with my hands, a shiver running down my spine. This was it. This was the path fate had shown me. I wouldn't have to lift a finger directly, wouldn't have to leave a single fingerprint on a weapon. All it would take was a watermelon, some fresh seafood, and my mother-in-law's deadly habit of saving electricity. I would turn that cozy kitchen into a death lab where gluttony and cheapness would be their own executioners. I pictured Dolores gleefully stuffing the unplugged refrigerator full of food, then eagerly forcing her son and her fake daughter-in-law to eat every last bite so nothing would go to waste. I stood up and paced the room, my mind racing with the detailed calculations for the upcoming performance. I needed to go back home, to play the part of the devoted wife and dutiful daughter-in-law returning from a trip, my arms laden with delicacies to treat the family. I would buy the things they craved most, the expensive items Dolores would never spend her own money on, to stimulate their greed to its absolute peak. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to practice a smile, Clara's old, innocent, submissive smile, but no matter how hard I tried, my eyes couldn't hide their coldness. I promised myself, "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry I have to be this cruel, but I have no other choice. The law requires evidence, and the evidence from your accident has been buried by time. I will use the law of karma to judge them. If they live righteously and know when to stop, they will escape. But if their greed blinds them, they will dig their own graves." I took a cab back to that house in the middle of the day, a time when the sun was at its harshest and people's guards were at their lowest. My hands were full of bags, all filled with expensive foods I had just bought from the supermarket and the seafood market. I bought a whole glistening fillet of salmon, several pounds of shrimp still twitching, fresh calamari, and, most importantly, a massive watermelon, its green rind smooth and round, like a promise of sweet death. I walked into the house with a practiced smile on my face, one I had rehearsed all night in front of the mirror to make it look as natural as possible. As soon as she saw me, Dolores, who was watching TV in the living room, jumped in her seat. She stammered, "Clara? Didn't you say you were on a business trip down south? Why are you back so soon?" I set the groceries on the table, wiping beads of sweat from my forehead, my voice cheerful. "Yes, Mom. The trip was canceled at the last minute because the client had an emergency. I just came straight home. On the way, I picked up some fresh seafood to treat everyone. It's been a while since we had a nice meal." Hearing the words fresh seafood and seeing the bulging bags, Dolores's eyes lit up. Her initial shock vanished, replaced by an undisguised greed. She rushed over, rummaging through the bags. My goodness, this salmon is huge. These shrimp must have been expensive. You really know how to waste money. But since you've already bought it, let me put it away. Mark came downstairs and saw me. His face momentarily changed, but he quickly composed himself into a facade of calm. He walked over, put his arm around my shoulder, and played the part of the caring husband. "Honey, why didn't you call? I would have picked you up. This is all so heavy, your hands must hurt." I looked into his eyes, fighting back the nausea rising in my throat, and replied softly, "I wanted to surprise you." Then I added, "Oh, and I bought a delicious watermelon. Let me cut it up for everyone to cool down." I took the watermelon into the kitchen, chose the sharpest knife, and slowly sliced it in half. The crisp cracking of the rind sounded delightful. I intentionally cut the melon into large, uncovered wedges and arranged them on a platter. I opened the refrigerator, and a foul, musty odor hit me, forcing me to hold my breath. The fridge was a chaotic mess, stuffed with plastic bags of leftovers from who knows when. Juices from vegetables and meat had leaked, leaving sticky residue on the shelves. Instead of cleaning it up as I normally would, I deliberately placed the platter of bare watermelon on a middle shelf, right next to a plate of raw pork that was leaking blood and a few uncleaned fish. I squeezed the shrimp and calamari into the gaps, creating the perfect opportunity for cross-contamination between raw and ready-to-eat food. I turned to Dolores. "Mom, the fridge is so full, I'll just put this here for now. We can have a big seafood dinner tonight. The watermelon is all cut so we can let it chill for you and Mark to have later." Dolores looked at the fridge, packed with delicious food, and nodded enthusiastically, a grin spreading across her face. Yes, just leave it there, I'll take care of it. You must be tired from your trip. Go on up to your room and rest." She glanced at the glistening red watermelon sitting next to the raw meat, but with her limited knowledge and years of unsanitary habits, she didn't see anything wrong. All she saw was a free feast. I washed my hands, took one last look at my creation, and closed the refrigerator door. A chill ran down my spine, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. I went upstairs. Mark followed me, closed the door, and asked in a probing tone, "Coming back so suddenly, does this affect your work at all?" I sat on the bed, feigning exhaustion as I rubbed my temples. "It's a bit of a hassle, but my boss was kind enough to give me a few days off. By the way, I've noticed Mom has been trying to save a lot of money on electricity lately. If she keeps unplugging the fridge like that, the food will spoil quickly." Mark waved his hand dismissively with a laugh. "Oh, you know how she is. I've told her 1,000,000 times, but she doesn't listen. Just let her be. If it spoils, we have money to buy more. Don't stress yourself out over it." He had no idea that his own careless indifference was sealing his fate. I lay down on the pillow and closed my eyes, but my ears were alert to every sound downstairs, waiting for night to fall, waiting for the moment Dolores would unplug the refrigerator as part of her daily ritual. I lay on the bed, pretending to be fast asleep, but my mind was as taut as a violin string. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang an alarm I had set, but with CEO as the contact name. I shot up and answered the phone with a panicked voice, putting on a show for Mark, who was playing a game on his phone nearby. "Hello? Yes, sir. What? The client wants to cancel the contract? Oh, no. Yes, I understand. I'll head to the airport immediately. Yes, sir. My apologies." I hung up and turned to Mark with a look of utter distress, hastily packing my clothes back into the suitcase. Mark put his phone down and frowned. "What's wrong? You just got back and you're leaving again?" I let out a long, weary sigh, my voice full of resignation. "It's just my luck. There's a huge problem with the contract I'm in charge of. My boss needs me to fly to San Diego immediately to sort it out. If not, we could lose over $1,000,000 in penalties. I think I'll be gone for another 3 or 4 days." Hearing this, Mark's eyes lit up. He tried to hide a triumphant smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. He was undoubtedly thrilled that I was leaving again, giving him and his mistress another opportunity to rendezvous in our house and feast on the food I had just bought. He stood up and patted my shoulder, faking concern. "Well, work is important. You go ahead. I can handle things here. You work too hard, honey. I worry about you." I dragged my suitcase downstairs. Dolores was bustling in the kitchen. Seeing me with my luggage, she asked in surprise, Where are you off to now? You just got here. I repeated the story about my boss's call, then added the most crucial line, the one that would trigger her insatiable greed. Mom, I'm so sorry. I bought all this delicious food to make a seafood dinner for everyone tonight, but I have to leave so suddenly. You and Mark, please make sure to eat all the seafood and watermelon in the fridge. That fresh stuff was very expensive, hundreds of dollars. Don't let it go to waste or sit too long and spoil. It would be such a shame. At the mention of expensive and waste, Dolores nodded eagerly, her eyes twinkling. Yes, don't you worry. You go take care of your work. Food this good, Mark and I will eat it. Why would we throw it away? I'll cook it all up carefully. Won't waste a single bit. She looked at me with a rare, fawning expression, probably thinking about the free feast to come. I looked at her one last time, at this greedy, cruel woman standing unknowingly on the precipice of death. A strange mix of bitterness and satisfaction rose within me. I walked out the door. Mark saw me to the taxi. He waved goodbye with a look of relief, as if he had just gotten rid of a heavy burden. As the car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him rush to close the gate and run back inside, no doubt to call his mistress Jessica to come and celebrate. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes, a single tear rolling down my cheek. It was done. The trap was set, the bait laid. Now, all that was left was for the greedy animals to walk into it themselves. I whispered to myself, "Eat up. Enjoy every bite. It's the last meal I'll ever serve you, a feast paid for with the lives of my parents and my own blind love." The taxi sped off into the twilight, leaving behind the house that was slowly sinking into darkness, where the Grim Reaper was patiently waiting to swing his scythe. I sat in a coffee shop across the street from my old apartment complex, holding a glass of watered-down iced tea, my eyes glued to my phone screen. Through a tiny camera hidden on top of the kitchen cabinet, I watched every movement inside the house I had just left. Night had fallen, and a deep silence enveloped the small kitchen. The dim yellow light cast a glow on the thin but nimble figure of my mother-in-law. Dolores paced back and forth, fanning herself with a hand fan, muttering calculations under her breath. I was certain it was about money, how to save every last penny in this house. Just as I predicted, she approached the refrigerator, now filled with the expensive gifts I had left behind. She opened the door, and a wave of cold air washed over her face, making her take a long, satisfied breath. She pulled out the platter of bright red watermelon, admiring it with a smack of her lips. My, that girl knows how to pick a melon. So red, it must be incredibly sweet. But leaving it like this is a waste of electricity. I'll just unplug it. The weather is cool tonight. The food won't spoil. With that, she bent down, her rough hand grabbing the plug and yanking it firmly from the wall. The low hum of the refrigerator motor abruptly ceased, leaving behind a dreadful silence, like the final heartbeat of a dying animal. Dolores closed the fridge door, her face glowing with the satisfaction of a great victory. She had no idea that her act of saving a few cents on the electric bill was the start button for a deadly biological chain reaction. Inside that dark, sealed space, as the temperature slowly rose, the cold air dissipated, replaced by a damp, stuffy warmth. The listeria bacteria from the leaking raw meat and the uncleaned fish began to stir, multiplying at an astonishing rate. They crept over and infiltrated the sweet, red flesh of the watermelon slices, turning the refreshing dessert into sugar-coated bullets of poison. The next morning, on my phone screen, I saw Dolores wake up early. She plugged the refrigerator back in, muttering to herself about how smart she was to save money for her children. She took out all the seafood and the watermelon, arranging a lavish spread on the dining table. Mark came downstairs, rubbing his eyes, but his nose was already twitching at the aroma. He saw the table laden with shrimp and fish, plus a platter of chilled watermelon for dessert, and his eyes lit up. "Mom, you're the best. My wife is away and we're eating better than at a wedding." Dolores chuckled, placing the largest piece of salmon on her son's plate. "Eat up, son. Clara bought it with her money, so why shouldn't we enjoy it? She said it was expensive and would spoil if we let it sit, so let's just eat our fill." I watched Mark put a piece of fish in his mouth, then grab a slice of watermelon and take a huge bite, the juice dripping down his chin. He ate with relish, greedily, as if he could devour the whole world. Dolores, sitting beside him, was no different. Between bites, she praised her foolish daughter-in-law for buying delicious food she couldn't even be there to enjoy, leaving it all for her mother-in-law. Watching them, a knot of pain tightened in my stomach. I thought of the simple meals of my childhood, when my parents would give their last piece of meat to me, of their silent sacrifices. Here, in this house, greed and selfishness had eroded all humanity, turning them into callous creatures even at the dinner table. The second day passed in tense anticipation. Through the camera, I saw Mark come home from work at his usual time and sprawl out on the sofa, scrolling through his phone while waiting for dinner. However, his face no longer held the smug satisfaction of the day before. He was grimacing, occasionally rubbing his lower abdomen, his brows furrowed in discomfort. It was the first sign, subtle but sure, that the bacteria were beginning their silent assault inside his body. That evening, Dolores served the leftovers from the previous day, true to her motto of eating everything and wasting nothing. The watermelon had started to weep, its color darkening, but she still salvaged it by trimming off the spoiled parts and replating it. Mark looked at the meal with a weary expression. He listlessly picked at his food for a few minutes before putting his fork down. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, my stomach feels weird. It's been a dull ache since this afternoon. Do you think the food was off?" Dolores, in the middle of shoveling a large mouthful of rice, stopped and glared at him. "You always make such a big deal out of nothing. Clara bought the best quality stuff and it's been in the cold fridge. How could it go bad? You probably just got a chill from sitting in the air conditioning all day before going out into the heat." Dolores was a stubborn woman who trusted her patchwork of folk wisdom far more than science. She got up and rummaged through the family medicine cabinet, pulling out a nearly empty bottle of menthol rub and a shriveled piece of ginger. She made Mark lie face down on the sofa and began vigorously rubbing the oil on his back, muttering, "Let me get rid of this cold for you. A cup of hot ginger tea after this, and you'll be fine." Such a grown man, with the stomach of a baby, complaining over every little thing. Mark lay still, groaning as she pressed hard on his back. He trusted his mother completely, just as he had once trusted that murdering my parents was a flawless plan. I watched the scene on my screen, a bitter taste in my mouth. My mother-in-law, the woman who prided herself on being a good mother, was now using her own ignorance to push her son closer to death. She had no idea his stomach ache wasn't from a chill but from toxins seeping into his bloodstream, and that rubbing oil and drinking hot ginger tea would only accelerate the inflammation. I saw Mark drink the entire cup of ginger tea, his face flushed from the heat, sweat pouring from his body. He drifted off into a restless, feverish sleep right there on the sofa. That night, I watched Dolores unplug the refrigerator again before going to bed, even though there were still leftovers inside. She turned off the lights, and the house fell into darkness. I sat huddled on my hotel bed, staring out at the city lights twinkling like distant stars. I wondered if Mark saw my parents in his dreams. I wondered if he felt any remorse for what he had done. Probably not. Greed had blinded him, erasing the line between good and evil. By the morning of the third day, Mark's condition had visibly worsened. Through the camera, I saw that he couldn't get up to go to work. He was curled up in bed, his body racked with violent shivers despite the sweltering heat. His face was ashen, drained of all color, and his lips were dry and cracked. He began to vomit violently, heaving until it seemed there was nothing left inside him. The sound of his retching, transmitted through the camera's speaker, was pathetic and wretched, but my heart had grown numb. All I felt was the cold detachment of a judge awaiting a verdict. Mark managed to sit up, calling out weakly to his mother, "Mom, I feel so sick. Maybe you should call a cab to take me to the hospital. Something's really wrong. My head is splitting." Dolores ran into the room holding a bowl of hot onion broth. Seeing her son in such a state, she looked worried for a moment, but her deep-seated cheapness quickly overpowered any maternal instinct. She set the bowl down and felt his forehead. "Such a high fever. The cold has really gotten into you. Why go to the hospital and waste money? They'll just invent a bunch of problems, run all sorts of tests, and it'll cost a fortune. You stay home. I'll take care of you, and you'll be fine." With that, Dolores scurried off to the pharmacy at the corner. I was sure she wouldn't be buying any prescription medicine, but rather whatever her own experience dictated. A few minutes later, she returned with a box of strong anti-diarrhea pills and some generic fever reducers. She helped Mark up and forced the pills on him. "Here, take these. They'll stop the runs, and you'll get your strength back." I bought the best kind. All the ladies at the market swear by this. She had no idea that for someone with sepsis like Mark, taking anti-diarrhea medication was a fatal mistake. The toxins and bacteria, instead of being flushed from his system, were now trapped inside his body, accumulating and launching a full-scale attack on his internal organs. After taking the medicine, Mark collapsed back onto the bed, his breathing heavy and labored. Dolores sat beside him, fanning him while muttering criticisms. "What kind of man is so weak? A little stomachache and he wants to go to the hospital. Your father was on his deathbed once and didn't even dare see a doctor. Just stayed home drinking herbal remedies and got better. You've had it too easy. That's your problem. Just rest a bit, and you'll be well enough to go make some money." Her words were like knives, twisting in the fragile thread of life Mark was clinging to. He closed his eyes, either from exhaustion or from helplessness against his mother's stubbornness. I looked at the clock. I knew the decisive moment had arrived. Listeria infection, once it enters the bloodstream, causes complications with terrifying speed. Dolores's arrogance and ignorance had just slammed the door on her son's last chance of survival. I closed my laptop and started packing my bags. It was time for the devoted wife to return home, to witness the final act, and play her last role in this family tragedy. I walked into the house as long evening shadows stretched across the floor. The air was thick with the smell of menthol rub, vomit, and the cloying scent of sickness. As soon as I stepped through the door, I called out, my voice laced with manufactured panic and surprise. "Mom? Mark? I'm home. Why is it so dark in here?" There was no answer, only a faint, weak moan coming from the first-floor bedroom, the room Dolores usually slept in, now a makeshift sick room for her son. I dropped my suitcase in the living room and rushed into the bedroom. The scene before me, though I had prepared for it, still made me shudder. Mark lay on the bed, his eyes closed, his skin a ghastly gray color, like ash. His breathing was a ragged wheeze, like a broken bellows. Dolores was slumped in a chair beside him, still clutching her hand fan, having dozed off from exhaustion. Hearing me, she startled awake. Seeing me was like a drowning person spotting a lifeline. Her voice was a pathetic whine. "Oh, Clara, you're back. Something's wrong with Mark. I think he caught a nasty bug. He's been throwing up since yesterday. I gave him medicine, but it's not helping much." I rushed to the bed and touched Mark's forehead. It was burning like a coal. I turned to Dolores, my tone reproachful but still maintaining a veneer of politeness. "My God, Mom, he's burning up. How could you say this is just a bug? Why didn't you take him to the hospital? What medicine did you give him?" Dolores stammered, holding out the box of anti-diarrhea pills. "Well, I saw he had diarrhea, so I bought this to stop it." I took the box, pretended to examine it, and sighed heavily, silently thanking her for her stupidity. To dispel any future suspicion about the source of the illness, I moved to the next step of my plan. From my purse, I pulled out several bottles of fresh watermelon juice I had bought at an upscale shop on my way home, a completely different watermelon from the poisoned one in the fridge. I poured a glass for Dolores and then drank a full glass myself right in front of her. As I drank, I spoke casually. "I was so thirsty from the trip. You have some juice too, Mom. It's refreshing." "I just bought some more. Did you and Mark finish all the seafood and the other melon I bought? Was it good?" Dolores took the glass and drank it in one gulp, nodding eagerly. "We finished it all. It was delicious. The shrimp and fish were so fresh, and the melon was incredibly sweet. It must be that Mark has a weak stomach. I ate it, and I'm perfectly fine." Her words were the best alibi I could have asked for. She had confirmed the food was good, that she had eaten it, and that she was fine. The truth was, she had eaten less, and her resistance might have been better at that moment, or the toxins hadn't fully taken hold. In any case, how could anyone blame me for poisoning them? Furthermore, my act of drinking watermelon juice immediately upon my return reinforced the belief that the food I brought home was safe. I looked at Mark, lying in a stupor, and gently shook him. "Mark, honey, I'm home. Hang in there. I'm going to call an ambulance to take you to the hospital." Mark's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was cloudy and lifeless. He tried to move his lips, to say something, but no sound came out. I took his cold hand, feigning sorrow as I rubbed it, but in my mind, a cold laugh echoed. "My love, your wife is back. I'm back to see you off on your final journey. Don't worry, I'll take care of you, just like you took care of me after my parents' accident." I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding Mark's cold, limp hand, but my mind was racing with cold calculations. For this performance to be flawless, so that no one, not even the most suspicious person, could question my innocence later, I knew I couldn't remain a healthy bystander. I had to become a victim myself, a lucky survivor of this family tragedy. With that thought, I released Mark's hand and clutched my own stomach, my face contorting in pain. I let out a soft groan, just loud enough for Dolores, who was dozing in her chair, to hear. "Oh, Mom, my stomach is cramping up all of a sudden. It must be from the long trip and that cold glass of watermelon juice." Dolores jolted awake, looking at me with a strange mixture of concern and relief. Perhaps deep down, seeing me with the same symptoms as her son convinced her that this was just a common case of food poisoning or, as she stubbornly insisted, a bad bug, and not a result of her unplugging the refrigerator. She smacked her lips, her voice feigning sympathy but laced with a hint of vindication. "See, I told you, the weather is toxic these days. Everyone's getting sick. Why don't you go to the bathroom? Maybe throwing up will make you feel better, like it did for Mark earlier. There are still some antacid pills in the medicine cabinet you can take." I clutched my stomach and rushed into the bathroom, slamming the door shut. The small space and the smell of bleach actually did make me feel nauseous. I stuck my fingers down my throat, forcing myself to make loud, violent, retching sounds for Dolores to hear. Tears streamed down my face from the natural reflex, but when I looked in the mirror, my eyes were still clear and sharp. I flushed the toilet, the sound of the swirling water washing away everything, just as it washed away the last shred of compassion I had for this family. I splashed cold water on my face, deliberately leaving it damp to look more haggard, then pulled a compact from my pocket and dusted a layer of pale powder on my lips and cheeks. When I emerged from the bathroom, I looked like I had just survived a near-fatal illness. I stumbled, leaning against the wall for support, my breathing shallow. Seeing me, Dolores rushed to help me to a chair, her voice now tinged with real panic. "You were throwing up that badly too? Good heavens, what is wrong with this house today, that both of you would get sick at the same time? Here, just sit and rest. I'll get you a glass of warm water." I took the glass from her, letting my hand tremble so that some of the water sloshed out. "I feel so weak, Mom," I wheezed. "Like my insides have been turned out. I think I have whatever Mark has. It's a good thing you're healthy. If we were all bedridden, I don't know what we'd do." My words were like a tranquilizer, directly soothing Dolores's ego. She puffed out her chest, a proud look on her face. "I told you. I ate it, and I was fine. You young people are so delicate. You eat too well, and your stomachs are weak. Back in my day, we ate rice mixed with cassava, and even when food was spoiled, we'd just cook it again and eat it. Nobody died. Now, you two just rest here. I'll go make a pot of plain white porridge. You can have some later. It will settle your stomachs." Dolores bustled off to the kitchen, the sound of her slippers shuffling through the quiet house. I watched her hunched back disappear, a back that carried a lifetime of toil, but also a cruel and stubborn ignorance. I turned back to Mark. He was still lying motionless, his breathing growing fainter. I knew the listeria bacteria were ravaging his body with every passing second. My feigned illness was not just to create an alibi, but also to lull Dolores into a false sense of security, making her believe the situation was common and not critical. This would delay her calling for help just a little bit longer, a small window of time that would decide the boundary between life and death. I lay down on the bed next to my husband, pulling the blanket over both of us, playing the part of a wife sharing in his suffering. But inside, I was counting down his every breath. Night fell, blanketing the house in a thick, suffocating darkness. Dolores, with her ingrained frugality, lit only a single dim nightlight in the corner and refused to turn on the air conditioning, despite the oppressive heat. She claimed a fan was enough and that sick people would only get worse in cold air. The room was stuffy, the sour smell of sweat mingling with the overpowering scent of menthol rub, making it hard to breathe. I lay still, feigning a feverish sleep, but all my senses were on high alert, listening for any change in the man beside me. Mark's condition began to deteriorate. At first, it was just soft moans, then mild tremors that shook the bed. Around midnight, things spiraled out of control. Mark suddenly arched his back, his eyes rolling back in his head, the whites gleaming eerily in the dim light. White foam frothed at his lips, and his limbs contorted as if being snapped by an invisible force. He made guttural, choking sounds, unable to breathe. I knew these were the signs of the bacteria attacking his brain, causing seizures and acute respiratory failure. The fateful moment had come. I couldn't delay any longer, lest this play turn into an obvious murder. I shot up and let out a blood-curdling scream that tore through the silent night. "Mom! Mom, what's happening to Mark? Mom, help him!" Dolores, who had been dozing in the armchair, jolted awake. She rushed to the bed, and seeing her son convulsing and foaming at the mouth, her face went deathly pale. Her legs trembled so badly she could barely stand. She stammered, her voice breaking with fear. "Mark! Mark! What's wrong?" "Oh my God, son, don't scare me like this. How did this happen?" In a panic, she tried to pry his mouth open to stop him from biting his tongue, a common folk remedy. But I quickly stopped her, pushing her hand away. "Don't, Mom, we have to call 911 right now. He can't breathe." I grabbed my phone, my hands faking a tremor as I dialed 911, but I kept my voice clear and steady enough to give the address. "Hello, 911? Please send an ambulance to... My husband is having a seizure. He's foaming at the mouth and can't breathe. Please hurry." After hanging up, I turned to Dolores, who was sobbing hysterically and slapping her son's face, trying to wake him. I started wailing too, tears streaming down my face. "Mark, don't leave me. Please hang on. The ambulance is coming. Mom, why is he so sick? This afternoon you said it was just a chill." My question was a knife twisting in Dolores's conscience. She looked bewildered, lost, muttering like she was in a trance. I didn't know. I thought it was just a bug. Who knew? Oh God, if anything happens to my son, how will I go on? The wail of an ambulance siren grew louder, shattering the neighborhood's peace. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, dancing on the walls like ghosts waiting to claim a soul. Paramedics rushed in, quickly administering first aid, inserting a breathing tube, and lifting Mark onto a stretcher. Dolores and I stumbled after them to the ambulance. Inside the vehicle, the siren blared in my ears. I looked at Mark lying motionless, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires. His face was purplish, his chest rising and falling weakly with the rhythm of the paramedic's manual resuscitator. A storm of emotions churned within me, a flicker of pity for the man I had once loved with all my heart, the man who had been my entire world. But then, the image of my parents lying in a pool of blood, their truck crumpled at the bottom of a ravine, flashed in my mind, extinguishing that tiny spark of compassion. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, reminding myself that this was the price he had to pay. He chose this path 3 years ago, when he cut that fateful brake line. The hospital at night was stark white and cold. The overpowering smell of antiseptic hung in the air, a constant reminder of the thin line between life and death. Mark was wheeled directly into the emergency room. The cold glass doors swung shut, separating us from the life-saving efforts within. Dolores collapsed onto a chair in the waiting area, burying her face in her hands, her sobs echoing down the empty hallway. I sat beside her, sniffling occasionally and wiping away tears, perfectly playing the role of a devoted wife in anguish. But my ears were strained, waiting for the final verdict from the doctor, the verdict that would seal their guilt. An hour passed like a century. Finally, the emergency room doors opened. A middle-aged doctor with a serious expression walked out, beads of sweat on his forehead. Dolores scrambled to her feet, grabbing his sleeve, her voice frantic. "Doctor, my son. How is my son? Can you save him?" The doctor looked from her to me and shook his head slightly, his voice low and grave. Please, remain calm. The patient's condition is critical. He has severe septicemia that has led to meningitis and multi-organ failure. We are doing everything we can to filter his blood and keep him alive, but the prognosis is very poor. Hearing this, Dolores's legs gave out. She would have fallen if I hadn't caught her. The doctor continued, his sharp gaze fixed on us. I need you to provide some honest information to help with his treatment. Has the patient eaten anything unusual recently? Does he have any pre-existing conditions? Why did you wait until his condition was this severe to bring him in? Dolores stammered through her tears. He didn't eat anything strange, doctor, just normal meals. And some seafood and watermelon his wife just brought home. He started complaining of a stomachache 2 days ago. I thought it was just a bug, so I gave him some anti-diarrhea medicine. At the mention of anti-diarrhea medicine, the doctor's brow furrowed, and his tone grew sharp. My God, he had a bacterial infection, and his body needed to expel the toxins, but you gave him medication to stop it? That's like locking the bacteria inside his body and helping them destroy his organs faster. You practically killed your son, do you realize that? Dolores froze, her eyes wide with horror, her mouth agape, unable to form a word. The doctor pressed on. And how was this food stored? Was it handled hygienically? It was my turn to speak. My voice was weak, and I clutched my stomach as if in pain. Doctor, the food I bought was very fresh. But my mother-in-law has a habit of saving electricity. Every night she unplugs the refrigerator and plugs it back in the morning. I've told her not to, but she never listens. Could that be why? The doctor sighed, shaking his head in weary frustration. That's it then, listeria. That bacteria thrives in cool but not cold enough temperatures, especially in a fridge that's constantly being turned on and off. Raw seafood and meat stored next to cut watermelon, with the power off overnight, that's no different than cultivating bacteria and serving it for dinner. No medicine in the world could save him from that, let alone over-the-counter pills. The doctor's conclusion was a death sentence, not just for Mark, but for Dolores's conscience. She stood there, stunned, her hands hanging limply at her sides, her aged face crumpling in horror. The very habit she had always been so proud of, her blind frugality, had become the scythe that was now reaping the life of her only son. I looked at her, feeling no satisfaction, only a vast, hollow emptiness. Evil had been punished by ignorance, a tragic and cruel end. The hospital corridor fell into a deathly silence after the doctor's verdict, broken only by Dolores's choked sobs. She sank to her knees on the cold tile floor, pounding her chest with her fists, letting out guttural, wordless cries of agony. Oh God, I killed my son. Mark, oh Mark, Mom has doomed you. Why was I so stupid? What was the point of saving a few dollars? Her heart-wrenching wails made passers-by turn and stare. She turned to me, her eyes pleading for help but also filled with a belated, profound remorse. Clara, I was wrong. I killed your husband. Please save him. I knelt beside her and gently helped her up, but my hands were ice cold, unable to offer any warmth. I looked deep into her red, swollen eyes, my voice strangely calm. Mom, crying won't do any good now. The doctors are doing their best. What's happened has happened. It's fate. You need to be strong, or if you collapse, who will be here for Mark? I spoke hollow words of comfort, but in my heart, I was whispering a different judgment. You cry for your son, but who cried for my parents? Who cried for the child you forced me to abort because you feared the expense? Is the pain you feel now equal to the pain I have endured for 3 years? Dolores continued to blame herself, slapping her own face, the same mouth that had berated me for being wasteful, the same mouth that had encouraged her son to cheat on his wife for a wealthy mistress. The sharp sounds echoed in the quiet hall. This mouth brought ruin. I was greedy. I was cheap. I thought I was helping my son, but I led him to his grave. If only I had listened to you, Clara. If only I hadn't been so cheap about the electricity. She mumbled like a madwoman, consumed by a guilt that had come far too late. Time could not be reversed, and the bacteria in Mark's blood would not disappear because of her crocodile tears. I helped her to a chair and gave her a bottle of water. She took one sip and then vomited violently onto the floor. The immense shock had completely broken her. I watched her, a woman who had spent her entire life scheming, penny-pinching, and deceiving others, only to lose everything because of those very schemes. This was karma, served cold. I sighed and looked up at the white ceiling, wondering if my parents were watching from above. Would this revenge bring me peace, or just pile on more tragedy? The door to the ICU swung open again. A nurse hurried out. "Family of Mark Johnson? The patient has regained consciousness for a moment. He wants to see his family one last time. You should prepare yourselves. It's unlikely he'll make it through the night." Hearing this, Dolores staggered to her feet and rushed into the room like a wild animal. I followed slowly, my heart as still as a calm lake. It was time to face my enemy one last time, to tell him the truth so he could carry that terror with him to his grave. I smoothed my clothes, wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, and prepared for the final scene of my life's tragic play. The door to the intensive care unit opened, and a blast of frigid air hit my face. The space inside was unnervingly quiet, punctuated only by the steady, cold beeping of the machines, like a countdown from the Grim Reaper. I donned the oversized blue protective gown and a mask that covered everything but my eyes, which were sunken from my feigned grief. The doctor informed me I had only 5 minutes, as the patient was extremely weak and all his vital signs were dropping fast. I nodded and walked heavily toward the bed in the corner, where the man I had once shared my life with was taking his last, shallow breaths. Mark lay there, his body a tangle of tubes and wires, a ventilator mask covering a face that was swollen and purple. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling feebly. He looked pathetic and alone. I stood silently by his bed for a long moment, my feelings so numb I couldn't find a trace of pity. I remembered him kneeling to propose to me 3 years ago, his radiant smile as he promised to protect me for the rest of my life. All those beautiful memories were now shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of a cold-blooded murderer who had taken my parents' lives for money. I bent down, my mouth close to his ear, the only part of him not covered by medical equipment. I spoke softly, my voice sweet, but laced with death. "Mark, honey, it's Clara, it's your wife. Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered and slowly opened, revealing a tiny, cloudy, and panicked slit. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for help. He was probably hoping for a miracle, hoping I would save him from this hell. He had no idea I was the one who had sent him here with such chilling precision. I gently stroked his cold, sweaty forehead and whispered, each word clear and deliberate. "Was the watermelon good, darling? And the salmon you ate yesterday, was it fresh? I told your mother not to unplug the refrigerator, but she just wouldn't listen. All the food got contaminated. But you know what, Mark? The truth is, I knew she would unplug it. I intentionally bought all that raw food and left it with the cut melon, just for you." Mark's pupils dilated, his gaze shifting from pleading to absolute terror. He tried to move, to struggle, but his body was paralyzed. Only his fingers twitched feebly on the white sheet. I continued my whisper, my voice as cold as ice. "You were planning to kill me for the $2.5 million and bring home your mistress and her child, weren't you? Did you think I didn't know you cut the brake lines on my parents' truck 3 years ago? I was under the bed that night, Mark. I heard everything. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. You can rest in peace now. When you get down there, make sure you apologize to my parents. As for your mother, don't you worry. She will live out the rest of her days tormented by the fact that she killed you with her own 2 hands. Mark's eyes bulged, his breathing under the oxygen mask becoming rapid and desperate. He wanted to scream, to accuse me, but no sound could escape. He could only lie there, helpless, listening to my confession words that were like 1,000 needles piercing his weakening heart. I stood up straight, looking into his eyes as the light began to fade from them, and offered a faint smile from behind my mask. "Goodbye, my terrible husband. If you get a next life, try to be a decent human being." After my final, fateful whisper, the heart monitor beside the bed erupted in a series of shrill, urgent alarms. Mark's eyes shot wide open. His body gave one violent convulsion and then went rigid, his eyes still fixed on the ceiling, filled with an unresolvable mixture of hatred and terror. The line on the monitor went flat, a long, endless signal of the end of a life filled with schemes and sin. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, pushing me out as they began the final, futile resuscitation procedures. I stepped out of the ICU and removed the cumbersome protective gown, feeling as if I had just shed a layer of filthy skin. The hospital corridor was still cold and deserted, except for the forlorn figure of Dolores, huddled on a waiting room chair, fiddling with a rosary. Seeing me emerge, she looked up, her swollen eyes filled with a desperate, fragile hope. I took a deep breath, squeezed out the most convincing tears of anguish I could muster, and walked over to her. I collapsed to my knees and broke into convulsive sobs. "Mom, Mark, he's left us. He's gone, Mom." Dolores stared blankly for a moment, as if the words hadn't registered. Then she let out a soul-shattering scream and fell back in her chair, flailing her arms and legs. "No, it can't be! My son! Why would you leave me? Oh God, why is this happening to me?" She scrambled to the ICU door and began pounding on it, screaming her son's name in despair. The nurses had to rush out and restrain her, giving her a sedative to stop her from causing a scene. I stood and watched the chaos, watching the woman who had just lost her son writhing in agony, my heart as still as a lake after a storm. Mark's death was swift and agonizing, just as I had planned. He died because of his own greed, because of the ignorance of the mother he always obeyed, and because of the hatred of the wife he had tried to kill. I helped the now limp Dolores back to a chair, rubbing her chest to help her breathe. All the while, I maintained my role as the dutiful, grieving daughter-in-law, but deep down, I was thinking of my parents. They must be watching from above, seeing that our family's enemy had paid his debt. No dramatic confrontation, no legal battle. The law of karma had delivered its own perfect justice. A doctor came out to announce the time of death and asked the family to handle the paperwork to release the body. I took charge of everything. From signing forms and arranging for a hearse to comforting my catatonic mother-in-law, I handled it all with a strange, calm efficiency. Anyone watching would have praised me as a strong, capable wife. Only I knew that this calmness came from a heart that had died long ago the night I lay under the bed and listened to my husband plot my murder. The hearse pulled away from the hospital, carrying Mark back to the house he had schemed to possess. A cold rain began to fall, the heavy drops drumming against the car window. Dolores lay with her head in my lap, having cried herself to exhaustion. Even in her sleep, she called out her son's name. I stared out at the white curtain of rain, feeling as if the heavens themselves were mourning a misguided life, or perhaps washing away the filth of this world. Mark's funeral was held on a day of torrential rain. The sky was a heavy, oppressive gray, looking as if it might collapse onto the cold, two-story house. The mournful sound of a lone bugler mixed with the drumming of the rain, creating a bleak, sorrowful soundtrack. Neighbors and acquaintances came to pay their respects, all murmuring their sympathies for the young man taken too soon and for the old mother who had to bury her own son. I stood by the casket in a black dress, a simple veil covering my face, greeting each guest. My face was gaunt, my eyes dark from sleepless nights, but no one could see the satisfaction hidden in their depths. As the casket was being prepared for burial, a palpable grief filled the air. Dolores was sobbing uncontrollably, supported by two relatives. Suddenly, a taxi pulled up to the cemetery gate. A woman got out. She wore a tight-fitting black maternity dress that showed off a prominent belly, and she clutched a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. As she walked, she wailed dramatically. "Mark, oh Mark, why did you leave me and our baby? Son, your daddy is gone." All eyes turned to the strange woman. A wave of whispers rippled through the mourners. I recognized her immediately. It was Jessica, my husband's mistress, the one who had sat on my bed and plotted my death. Jessica rushed toward the open grave, trying to throw herself onto the casket, but was held back by several men. She struggled, tears and snot streaming down her face, then turned and collapsed at Dolores's feet. "Mom, it's me, Jessica. I'm carrying Mark's child, your grandson, the heir to the family name. He's gone now, Mom. Please don't abandon us." Dolores, who had been in a catatonic state, snapped to attention at the words, "grandson." Like a drowning person finding a raft, she lunged forward and embraced Jessica, her hands caressing the pregnant belly as if it were a precious treasure. "Oh my God, is it true, my grandchild? The Johnson family heir is here. Mark, if you can hear me, please watch over your son." The scene of the mother-in-law and the mistress weeping in each other's arms in the middle of a funeral was startling. Everyone looked at me with pity, the official wife, standing alone and forgotten. I maintained a calm, cold expression, observing this grotesque melodrama. Having secured her grandchild, Dolores's attitude toward me shifted instantly. She spun around, her eyes sharp, and pointed a finger at my face, her shrill voice cutting through the cemetery's somber atmosphere. "You see this? This woman, with no official status, was able to give my son an heir. And you, his wife for 3 years, were barren. Now your husband is dead, and you just stand there like a statue. You are a useless woman, a curse that has wiped out the good fortune of this family." Her accusations were like daggers to my pride, but I felt no pain, only a dark amusement. So, all our years of being family meant nothing in the face of a grandchild whose legitimacy was highly questionable. She was willing to trample on the honor of her lawful daughter-in-law to protect her son's mistress, all because of greed and an archaic obsession with a male heir. I stood up straight and looked directly into the eyes of both women, my voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, today is Mark's funeral. Please have some respect for his memory. As for the child, we'll see who the real grandchild is in due time. There are laws for these things. No one can just claim a child without proof." Hearing my firm tone, Jessica flinched and huddled closer to Dolores for protection. Dolores, however, was emboldened. She wrapped her arm tightly around Jessica and declared, "I don't care about your laws. This is my flesh and blood, and I will claim him. From now on, Jessica will live with me. I will take care of her and my grandson. And you," she sneered at me, "you had better watch yourself. Don't you dare touch either of them." I offered a faint, chilling smile and nodded. "Of course, Mom. Please take good care of her. I'm also very much looking forward to the day your grandson is born." A cold wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the dead leaves, heralding the start of a bitter war for the inheritance, before the grave was even covered. Just 3 days after the funeral, the scent of incense still lingering in the air, a family meeting was urgently convened in the living room. Dolores sat enthroned in the main armchair, with Jessica beside her, stroking her pregnant belly, a look of triumph on her face like a newly crowned queen. I sat opposite them, calmly sipping a cup of hot tea, feeling the initial bitterness on my tongue give way to a sweet aftertaste, much like my life at that moment. Dolores slammed her hand on the table, beginning with a domineering tone. "I've called you here today to discuss Mark's assets. Jessica is pregnant with his son, the only heir to this family. By right, everything Mark left behind should go to his son." Jessica quickly pulled a 4D ultrasound photo and a prenatal DNA test from her purse, no doubt done covertly with a hair sample she'd collected from Mark, and pushed them across the table toward me. Her voice was syrupy but sharp. "Here you go, Clara. This is undeniable proof. I'm not greedy, but I have to fight for my son's rights. With Mark gone, we have no one. Surely you wouldn't have the heart to fight a newborn baby for his inheritance?" Dolores chimed in. "That's right. You were his wife, but you have no child, which makes you an outsider. Just take a little money and move out. Leave this house for Jessica and my grandson. That way I can take care of them." I picked up the ultrasound photo and smirked. The pregnancy might be real, but whether the child was Mark's was another question entirely. However, I wasn't going to expose her just yet. I set the papers down and looked directly at the 2 greedy women. "You both have a point," I said calmly. "The family heir should certainly receive his inheritance. I'm not a stingy person. I'm willing to divide the assets according to the law." I paused, watching their delighted faces, then continued. "But before we divide the assets, we have to settle all of Mark's debts." The color drained from their faces, their smiles vanishing. Dolores stammered, "Debts? What debts? Mark was a manager. He had plenty of money. What debts could he have?" I stood up, walked to the safe for which I had already changed the combination, and pulled out a thick folder. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It contained loan shark agreements, pawned asset receipts, and collection notices from unsavory characters, all things Mark had hidden while funding his crypto gambling and his mistress. I flipped through the pages for them, my voice like steel. "Here, Mom, look. Mark was borrowing from loan sharks to day trade Bitcoin, and he lost everything. The total debt, including interest, is almost $500,000. According to inheritance law, whoever receives the inheritance is also responsible for the debt, up to the value of the assets received. If Jessica wants to claim the assets for her son, then she can sign here and help me shoulder this $500,000 debt." Jessica picked up a loan agreement, her hands trembling, her face white as a sheet. She was a gold digger who had latched onto Mark, thinking he was wealthy. Discovering he was massively in debt was her worst nightmare. $500,000 was an astronomical sum. Selling the house might not even cover it, let alone leave anything to inherit. She looked to Dolores for help, but Dolores was also sitting frozen, her mouth agape. She couldn't believe her perfect son was such a degenerate. I delivered another psychological blow. "So, Jessica? Do you truly love Mark? Do you care about your son? If you do, sign here. We can sell the house together to pay off his debts so he can rest in peace. We wouldn't want the loan sharks coming around, threatening to break legs, would we? That would be terrible for the baby." Jessica snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned, stammering denials. "No. I didn't know anything about this. We were just friends. And this baby? I'm not even sure it's Mark's. I have to go." She grabbed her purse and tried to make a run for it. Dolores, in a panic, grabbed Jessica's arm. "Wait! What are you saying? You just said he was the heir." Jessica shoved Dolores's hand away, her true crass nature revealed. "Let go of me. My baby is my business. He has nothing to do with your family. You're all a bunch of frauds, pretending to be rich when you're drowning in debt. I'm not stupid enough to get involved in this mess." With that, she fled out the door without a backward glance. I watched her go with a cold smile. Dolores collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest and gasping for air. The shock was too much for her. She had just lost her son, only to discover he was a debtor, and now her precious heir had vanished into thin air. Her fantasy world of wealth and prestige was crumbling around her. Jessica grabbed her purse and shot up, her face drained of color, ready to flee the massive debt I had just unveiled. But I wasn't about to let her escape so easily, not when the best part of the show was about to begin. I moved quickly to block her path to the door. My gaze was no longer submissive. It was as sharp as a scalpel, ready to dissect her lies. "Where are you going in such a hurry, Jessica?" My voice was calm but held an undeniable authority. "I can understand being scared of the debt. But what about my mother-in-law's precious heir? Where do you plan on taking the Johnson family's bloodline?" Seeing me stop Jessica, Dolores clutched at her last hope. She too scrambled over and grabbed Jessica's arm, her voice a desperate, trembling plea. "That's right. Go wherever you want, but you have to leave my grandson with me. Or just stay here, have the baby, and I'll raise you both. Clara can deal with the debt. My grandson is my treasure. I can't let him become a wanderer." Jessica struggled to break free from the old woman's grasp. "Let me go!" she shrieked, her true colors showing. "I told you it has nothing to do with me. Your family is broke, drowning in debt. I'm not stupid enough to walk into that trap." I stood with my arms crossed, watching the tug-of-war between the two greedy women. Then, I slowly pulled a small envelope from my pocket. I held it up for them to see. "You can stop the act now, Jessica," I said with a faint smile. "I have a little gift for you. Why don't you take a look before you decide whether to stay or go?" Jessica froze, eyeing the envelope with suspicion. I slowly opened it, pulling out a stack of photos and a lab report, and tossed them onto the glass coffee table. The photos showed Jessica entering a hotel with another man. But more importantly, there was a brand new gynecological health report from a reputable clinic. I pointed to the results, enunciating each word. "Take a close look. This is from an exam you had 2 weeks ago, courtesy of a private investigator I hired. It clearly states your uterine lining is thin and there is no gestational sac. So, What exactly is that lump you're carrying? A pillow? A silicone prosthetic? Or is it a malignant tumor of lies?" Dolores froze, her hand dropping from Jessica's arm, her eyes wide as she stared at the report as if she'd seen a ghost. "What? What? No baby? Then, where is my grandson?" Jessica's face went pale, sweat beading on her forehead. She backed away, instinctively covering her fake belly. The truth was laid bare under the cold living room lights. I stepped toward her and yanked at the loose maternity dress she was wearing. A small pillow, cleverly tied around her waist, was exposed and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The room was plunged into a dead silence. Dolores stared at the pillow lying on the floor, then at Jessica's brazen face. Her entire world collapsed. Her last hope, the life raft named Air that she had clung to as justification for all her sins, turned out to be nothing but an elaborate hoax. Dolores stood rooted to the spot, her mouth hanging open, her hands trembling in the air as if trying to tear apart something invisible. Seeing that she was completely exposed, Jessica's demeanor shifted from fear to defiance. She tossed her head back, her voice dripping with scorn. "Yeah, so I'm not pregnant. So what? It's your son's fault for being an idiot who falls for any pretty face. He believed every word I said. He gave me that money willingly. I didn't hold a knife to his throat." Hearing such venomous words, Dolores snapped. She lunged at Jessica, trying to grab her hair. "You conniving witch! You lied to me! You lied to my son! Give me back my money! Give me back my grandson!" But her frail strength was no match for Jessica's youth. Jessica shoved her, and Dolores tumbled onto the sofa. I watched the chaotic scene without a shred of pity, only a sense of profound, tragic irony. I took out my phone, dialed 911, and held it up. "Jessica, you have two choices. 1. You return the $50,000 Mark transferred to you over the last 3 months. I have all the bank statements right here. 2. I report you to the police for fraud and extortion." At the mention of police and jail, Jessica's face went white. As vicious as she was just a small-time gold digger. The law terrified her. She stammered, her eyes darting around for an escape. Don't threaten me. I spent all that money, and it was a gift. You can't ask for a gift back." I took a step closer, my smile cold. "A gift? A sum that large, combined with the fact that you faked a pregnancy to get it, constitutes fraud. Do you want to go to jail? Or do you want to walk out of here right now and disappear from our lives forever?" Jessica weighed her options. She knew she couldn't win. She grabbed her purse, shot Dolores one last hateful glare, and fled, shouting a final obscenity as the door slammed shut behind her. The door closed, returning a suffocating silence to the room. Dolores was slumped on the floor, her hair disheveled, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She had lost her son, her imaginary grandson, and had been scammed out of a fortune. She looked up at me, her eyes vacant, and mumbled, "Clara, is it all over? Where's my grandson? Where's Mark? How did our family come to this?" I sat down opposite her, my gaze a mixture of pity and contempt. "You see now, Mom? You scorned me for being barren. You pushed Mark to have an affair to get you an heir. In the end, your grandson was a pillow. Your son is dead because you were too cheap to pay the electric bill, and your money was stolen. This," I said, my voice slow and deliberate, each word like salt in her wounds, "is the price you pay for your greed and your cruelty." Dolores clutched her chest, her eyes rolled back, and her body began to convulse before she passed out. The successive shocks had finally shattered the last remnants of her sanity. I called an ambulance to take her to the hospital, but this time there was no feigned concern as there had been for Mark, only the detached feeling of someone completing a final duty. The doctors diagnosed her with a minor stroke, brought on by extreme psychological distress. It wasn't life-threatening, but the neurological damage was severe. When she regained consciousness, her eyes were no longer sharp and calculating, but dull and vacant. She would stare at the white ceiling and giggle, drool trickling from her mouth, occasionally clapping her hands like a toddler. I brought her home to care for her, or rather, to let her live out her remaining days in the personal hell she had created. The large, 2-story house now felt as cold and empty as a tomb. Dolores drifted between lucidity and madness. During the day, she would huddle in a corner, counting her fingers and muttering about money and land. At night, when the wind howled through the cracks in the windows, she would descend into panic. She would run through the house, rummaging in the refrigerator, crying out her son's name. "Mark, come eat your watermelon. I plugged the fridge in. It's nice and cold. It won't spoil." Some nights, I would lie in my room with the door locked, listening to her scratching at the wood, her mournful wails echoing through the house. "Don't unplug it! Don't unplug it! My son is dead! Give me back my son! The pillow! My grandson is a pillow!" Her screams in the dead of night were more terrifying than any horror movie. The neighbors began to gossip, saying the house was haunted, that it was karma for a wicked life. No one dared to visit. The house became an isolated island in a busy suburban neighborhood. One afternoon, I stood on the second-floor balcony, watching Dolores in the yard below, arranging dead leaves into neat rows, a vacant smile on her face. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected, only a profound sense of sorrow. My revenge was complete. My enemies were ruined, living a life worse than death. But the wound in my heart had not healed. My parents were not coming back, and my youth was buried in this tragedy. I realized that when you throw mud at others, you can't help but get your own hands dirty. But I had no regrets. If I hadn't been ruthless, the one lying 6 feet under would have been me. Dolores now lived in her own world, a chaotic blend of past and present, a prison built from her own sins. She was terrified of light, of the hum of the refrigerator, and especially of red, juicy watermelon. The sight of it would send her into shrieking fits, clawing at herself as if she were seeing blood. The punishment of one's own conscience is sometimes 1,000 times crueler than any verdict from the law. I looked at her and thought, "Go on living like this, Mom. Live to remember, and live to pay the debt for what you have done." After dealing with Mark's affairs and Dolores's descent into madness, I moved on to the next phase of my plan, liquidating the assets to pay the debts. The $500,000 debt I had invented to scare off Jessica was based on Mark's real crypto losses, but the loan shark documents were a mix of forgeries and papers I'd collected from his old contacts. They looked authentic enough. I used these documents to justify the urgent sale of the house, a place that held too many painful and filthy memories. I wanted nothing left of them. I wanted to erase the past and start over. I hired a real estate agent and listed the house for a quick sale, pricing it slightly below market value. Dolores, lost in her delusions, cowered in a corner when strangers came to tour the house. I knelt beside her, stroking her hair, my voice soft but manipulative. "Mom, Mark owed a lot of money to some very bad people. They're coming for it soon. If we don't sell the house to pay them back, they're going to take you away. They'll hurt you, Mom. It will be very scary." At the mention of loan sharks and being hurt, she trembled violently, her eyes wide with terror. In her fractured mind, the fear of pain and losing money remained potent. She nodded frantically, drool spilling from her lips. "Sell it! Sell it! Don't let them take me! I'm scared! Pay them!" I placed the power of attorney form in front of her, a document I had cleverly prepared when she was more lucid, tricking her into signing it in the panic after Mark's death. I took her hand and pressed her thumb onto the ink pad and then onto the paper. One messy signature, one red thumbprint. It was done. The house was now legally mine to sell. The sale was swift. The buyers were a young couple, oblivious to the tragedies that had unfolded within these walls, attracted only by the bargain price. I watched them happily planning their renovations and silently wished them a new, vibrant life in this gloomy house. The sale brought in $600,000. I took a small portion and opened a trust account in Dolores's name, enough to cover her expenses at a basic nursing home. I kept the rest as my own compensation for the emotional and material damages I had suffered. On moving day, I hired a crew to pack everything. Mark's designer suits, Jessica's abandoned high heels, Dolores's fancy china, it all went into large bags for donation or the dump. I stood in the empty living room, looking at the faded outlines on the walls where pictures used to hang, feeling a profound sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from my chest. I had taken back what was mine, and what they had stolen. Dolores sat on the last remaining piece of furniture, an old wooden chair, clutching the pillow Jessica had left behind, cooing to it. "Sleep tight, my sweet grandson. Your daddy has gone to make money." I looked at her one last time, not with hatred, but with pity for a life lost to delusion. I called a taxi to take her to a nursing home on the outskirts of the city, a place for which I had prepaid a full year. There, she would be cared for, medicated, and, most importantly, unable to harm anyone else. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the house, my insane mother-in-law, and a past filled with tears. The 2-story house, once my pride and joy, a place where I had poured so much of myself, now stood empty and chillingly cold. The expensive furniture, the art, the houseplants, all were hauled away, leaving ghostly patches on the time-stained walls. I stood in the living room, watching the new owners, the young couple, excitedly measuring spaces for their sofa and TV. Their eyes sparkled with the joy of new beginnings, a naive hope that reminded me so much of myself 3 years ago. I smiled bitterly, praying they would never experience the kind of tragedy I had under this roof. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, once our private world, now the origin point of a dark conspiracy. I opened the closet and pulled out Mark's crisp suits, the ties I had carefully chosen for his birthdays. His familiar cologne still clung to the fabric, a scent that once made my heart race but now only filled me with disgust. I threw it all into the large plastic bags scattered on the floor. The movers looked at me with sympathy, probably assuming I was a grieving widow trying to erase painful memories. They had no idea I was simply taking out the trash. In the corner, Dolores sat on the lone wooden chair, her vacant eyes following the bags being dragged away. She no longer screamed or cursed, just mumbled nonsense, occasionally reaching out as if to grasp something invisible. I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mom, the car is here. It's time to go. We've sold the house. The new owners need to move in." She looked up, a flicker of fear in her eyes before they went dull again. She clutched the pillow tighter. "Where are we going?" "Back to the country. Mark said he would build me a big house." Her words were a needle in my heart, a reminder of the empty promises Mark had used to manipulate his greedy mother. He promised her a mansion and a life of luxury, and left her with nothing but madness and solitude. I sighed and helped her to her feet. "Yes, we're going to a new place. There will be lots of other seniors there, and people to take care of you. You won't have to worry about cooking or saving electricity anymore." She followed me obediently, her body stooped and frail. She crossed the threshold without a single glance back at the house she had valued more than her daughter-in-law's life. Perhaps, in her subconscious, she too wanted to escape the ghosts of her sins. I handed the keys to the new owners, collected the final payment, and signed the closing papers. Holding the deed in my hand, I felt weightless, as if a crushing boulder had been lifted off my chest. The iron gate clanged shut behind me, severing my final tie to the Johnson family. I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, high blue, with fluffy white clouds drifting lazily, a sign of a new beginning. Late, but not too late. While clearing out the last of the clutter from Mark's home office, I accidentally knocked a heavy book off the shelf. It was an old English dictionary he never used, but always kept in a place of prominence. When it hit the floor, the cover sprung open, revealing that the inside had been hollowed out. Nestled within was a small, black leather-bound notebook and a cold, metallic USB drive. My heart skipped a beat. Instinct told me this was the key to the financial secrets Mark had guarded so closely. With trembling hands, I opened the notebook. The yellowed pages were filled with Mark's messy scrawl, usernames and passwords for dark web forums, gambling sites, and, most importantly, a long, nonsensical string of characters that I immediately recognized as the private key to a cryptocurrency wallet. I thought of all the times Mark had pleaded poverty, asking me for money for utilities, even for his phone bill, while he was secretly amassing a fortune in the digital world. He had been preparing for his new life with Jessica, a life of luxury built on my money and my corpse. I opened my laptop, plugged in the USB drive, and followed the instructions in the notebook. A loading symbol spun for a few seconds, and then a number appeared on the screen that made me gasp, nearly dropping the glass of water in my hand. The balance in the wallet was hundreds of thousands of dollars, a fortune large enough to live comfortably for the rest of one's life. It turned out the $500,000 debt I had invented wasn't entirely a lie. He had gambled and lost, but the assets he had hidden were far greater. He was a greedy, cunning fox to his very core. I looked at the number on the screen and laughed until I cried. "Oh, Mark, you pinched every penny with your wife. You let your mother unplug the fridge to save a few cents, and you died in agony without ever getting to spend a dime of this dirty money. You were going to use this to build a new life with your mistress, and now it belongs to me, the wife you saw as a thorn in your side. Was this some cruel twist of fate, or a final, forced apology from beyond the grave?" I quickly transferred the entire sum to a new cold storage wallet I had just created, changing all the passwords and locking it down. Holding this immense wealth didn't bring me the ecstatic joy of a lottery winner, only a cold sense of security. It was the price for my youth, my love, and the emotional scars that would never fully heal. I closed the laptop and secured the wallet in my purse. This was the compensation the Johnson family owed me. I glanced at Mark's photo, which was lying in a cardboard box ready to be burned, and whispered, "Thank you. I will use this money to live a very good life, a life that will make up for the one you tried to take from me. You can rest now. I'll be sure to spend your money well." I took a taxi straight to the city cemetery where my parents were buried. The rain had stopped, and weak rays of sunlight were breaking through the gray clouds, illuminating the rows of white headstones on the pine-covered hill. I walked slowly along the damp brick path, carrying a bouquet of vibrant yellow chrysanthemums and a bottle of good bourbon. The wind whispered through the pines, a sound like the murmurs of departed souls. My heart was unusually calm, free of the raw anguish of previous visits. In its place was the peace of someone who has fulfilled a mission. I stopped before two graves side by side, green grass growing at the base of the headstones. My parents' smiling faces looked out at me from the stone, the same smiles that had haunted me for 3 years, pushing me to survive and to seek justice. I laid the flowers down, poured 3 small glasses of bourbon, and lit a bundle of incense. The smoke curled into the air, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I knelt on the cold ground and touched my mother's picture. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, "your unworthy daughter has finally come to see you. The man who caused your accident, the one who stole you from me, he has paid his debt." I took Mark's death certificate and a copy of the fake loan documents from my purse. I lit them on fire, one by one, watching the orange flames consume the black ink, turning them to ash. "I didn't use a knife or a gun," I said through tears. "I used their own greed and wickedness to punish them. I know you wouldn't have wanted me to have blood on my hands, but I had no other choice. The law had no proof, so I had to be the judge. Now he is dead, his mother is insane, and their family is destroyed. I think you can finally rest in peace." The wind picked up, scattering the ashes into the air, where they vanished. I felt a 1,000-pound weight lift from my shoulders. A gentle sense of release washed over me. I sat there for a long time, telling my parents about my plans for the future, about leaving the city, about the little house by the sea I had always dreamed of. I promised them I would live a happy, strong life, to honor their memory and their sacrifices. When I finally stood to leave, the sun was fully out, its golden light bathing the cemetery in a warm glow. I looked back at my parents one last time and smiled. A genuine, light-hearted smile. "Don't worry, I'm going to be okay. Goodbye, Mom and Dad. I'm leaving now." I walked away, my posture straight, my shadow stretching long on the path before me. After leaving the cemetery, I went to the nursing home to sever the last ties with Dolores. It was a modest, clean facility on the outskirts of the city. I met with the administrator and prepaid for 3 years of care. It was a small fraction of the money I now had, but it was enough to ensure she had a bed, food, and basic medical attention. It was the last act of mercy I could offer the woman who had wanted me dead. In the small garden, I saw Dolores sitting on a bench, still clutching that dirty pillow. She was humming to herself, her eyes staring into the distance. She didn't recognize me. A fleeting sense of pity washed over me, but it was quickly extinguished by reason. I didn't approach her. My presence would mean nothing now and might only agitate her. I watched her for a moment from afar, like a stranger, a relic of a past I needed to forget. She would live out her days in her delusional world, paying for her sins with loneliness and oblivion. Leaving the facility, I took out my phone for one final task. I went through my contacts and blocked every number associated with my old life. Dolores, her relatives, the people who had mocked me. Each tap of the screen was like breaking a chain. Then, I called the phone company and requested that my number be permanently disconnected. I popped the SIM card out, snapped it in two, and tossed it into a roadside trash can. The sound was crisp and satisfying. I got into a waiting taxi and gave the driver the name of the airport. As the car pulled away, leaving the smoggy, noisy city behind, I watched the familiar buildings recede in the distance, feeling as light as a bird freed from its cage. In my bag, I had only my ID, the cold wallet, and a new bank account in my name. Clara. No longer a Johnson, no longer a widow. I was just myself, free and independent. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, and thought, goodbye, past, goodbye, pain. Sometime later, through a nurse at the nursing home whose number I had saved, I learned how Dolores's final days had played out. The nurse told me, with a sympathetic voice, that Dolores was their most pitiable case, no one ever visited. The prepaid funds were enough to keep her there, with a bed and simple meals. Her room was at the darkest end of the hall, a fitting place for a soul consumed by shadows. She lived in a chaotic world between reality and illusion, often sitting for hours by the window, stroking the tattered pillow, humming old lullabies. In her delusions, she was still the powerful matriarch of a grand house. But a sudden gust of wind or a clap of thunder would send her scrambling under the bed, trembling like a wounded animal. Her greatest terror was watermelon. The nurse said that one time the kitchen served it for dessert. The moment Dolores saw the red flesh, she screamed, threw her food tray, and clawed at the walls until her fingers bled. She shrieked that it was her son's blood, that the melon was poison. After that, nothing red was ever brought near her. She lived in constant fear, tormented by the memory of her own deadly frugality. The image of the unplugged refrigerator cord became a recurring nightmare that haunted her to the end. Her final days were spent wasting away, a skeleton with hollow eyes staring at the ceiling. She died one stormy night, utterly alone. Her death was the final punctuation mark on a family tragedy, a grim warning against greed and cruelty. When I heard the news over the phone, my heart felt nothing. I simply sighed, hoping her soul might find peace. I chose a sunny, wind-swept coastal city to start my new life, 1,000 miles away from the past. The ocean here was a brilliant, endless blue, and the salty air tasted of freedom. With my funds, I bought and renovated an old house a few steps from the beach, turning it into a charming little bed and breakfast, just as I had always dreamed. The hard, physical work was healing. Each drop of sweat seemed to wash away a piece of the pain. The B&B brought all kinds of people into my life, each with their own story. I listened, I shared, and in their stories, I saw reflections of my own journey. I realized I was not alone. One autumn afternoon, a guest named Michael arrived. He was a man my age, with a kind face and warm eyes that held a hint of a familiar sadness. He was also healing from a broken marriage, from a betrayal that had shattered his trust. We shared our stories, finding a quiet understanding in our shared pain. Before he left, he told me he had known me, from a distance, 3 years ago. He had been an engineer on a project near my old house and had seen me, had wanted to speak to me but never did. Fate, it seemed, was a strange and wonderful thing. He left me his number, saying, "If you ever need a friend, I'm here. You deserve to be happy." His words planted a seed of hope in my heart. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt it begin to warm again. That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, I walked along the beach. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old wedding ring, the last relic of my hellish marriage. I had kept it as a reminder of the pain, of the price of survival, but standing before the vast, forgiving ocean, I realized the greatest revenge is not to inflict pain, but to find your own happiness and forget your enemies ever existed. I smiled, a true, peaceful smile, and with all my strength, I threw the ring as far as I could into the sea. It sketched a golden arc against the twilight sky and then vanished into the waves. The ocean accepted my past, burying it forever. I took a deep, cleansing breath of salty air, feeling utterly and completely free. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. "There's a new coffee shop on the hill with a beautiful view. I'd love to take you this weekend." A radiant smile spread across my face. I didn't know what the future held, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was that my heart was open again. I turned and walked back toward my little B&B, glowing warmly in the dusk. Life is a long journey, full of storms. But after the storm, the sun will always shine again for those who are brave enough to keep walking.